The world was on fire. Not metaphorically, literal sheets of flame stretched across the skyline as if the atmosphere itself had caught fire. Plasma bolts streaked from the heavens, trailing white-hot smoke as they punched into the earth, cracking highways and leveling entire city blocks. The air reeked of burning metal, scorched flesh, and the pungent tang of ozone. Sergeant Elias Voss crouched behind the charred remains of a military transport, his helmet visor cracked, feeding him distorted readouts of atmospheric toxicity. His breathing was shallow, not just from exhaustion but from the creeping dread that had lived in his chest since the aliens had first arrived. "Voss, report," came the sharp voice of Captain Marin Halloway through the comlink embedded in his ear. He tapped the side of his helmet, jostling the faulty receiver. "Voss here. I'm pinned. They've got line of sight from the eastern ridge. I count 3, maybe 4 snipers. Can't move." There was a pause. Then Halloway's voice returned, tense but firm. "Hold position. We're sweeping through the south. It's 5 minutes." Voss grimaced. 5 minutes was an eternity under this kind of fire. The alien weapons weren't like anything they'd seen before. One shot from those plasma rifles could reduce a soldier to a smear of ash and twisted armor. He chanced a look past the transport's edge, scanning the craggy ridgeline. His visor's auto-zoom flickered, highlighting vague, shifting figures silhouetted against the inferno-red sky. The aliens didn't move like humans. Their limbs had too many joints, their strides too long, like marionettes with invisible strings pulling them in jerky, unsettling patterns. Their bodies shimmered faintly, like heat haze, making it difficult to pin down their exact position. Soldiers had started calling them phantoms for that reason, though the official designation was Type 7 Xenos. Not that names mattered anymore. What mattered was survival. Voss slumped back against the wreckage, his gauntlets trembling. His pulse thudded in his ears. For weeks since the phantoms had arrived. No warnings, no negotiations. They had descended in vast, circular ships, blocking out the sun like eclipses. Cities burned on day 1. Communications collapsed by day 3. By week 2, Earth's military forces had united under a single command. Too little, too late. The enemy was too fast, too strong, too advanced. Now it was week 4, and it felt like there was nothing left to fight for. He gripped his rifle tighter, his fingers slick with sweat. He could hear the faint sizzle of plasma bolts hitting the transport's frame. Pop, pop, pop. They were probing, looking for a way to flush him out. They didn't need to rush. They never did. The phantoms had patience that no human could match. "Voss, you copy?" Captain Halloway's voice came back, louder this time. "Yeah, I copy," he muttered. "Still pinned." "Well, stay pinned for a bit longer." Her voice lowered to a whisper. "We got eyes on a phantom officer." Voss frowned. "Officer? They have officers now." "Something new," Halloway confirmed. "Larger frame. Got some kind of pack on its back like a control node. If we take it out, maybe we can disrupt their comms." "Understood," Voss replied, checking his rifle's charge. 17 shots left. Not ideal. He risked another glance around the corner. The phantoms were still on the ridge, creeping lower, each movement more deliberate than the last. No sign of this officer, but he trusted Halloway's call. She was one of the last officers he trusted. One shot. Make it count, he told himself, narrowing his eyes at one of the phantoms. It twitched, its elongated head turning as if sensing his gaze. "Damn it," he hissed, ducking back. They could feel it when you were watching them. He'd heard soldiers talk about it in the barracks, calling it predator sense. Some thought it was psychic, others just advanced sensors. Didn't matter. What mattered was that it worked. The ground trembled. vibrating like an earthquake. No, not an earthquake. Footsteps. Heavy, rhythmic thud footsteps. Voss, it's coming toward you. Holloway's voice cut in, urgency rising. It's the officer. It's headed straight for you. He felt the vibration intensify. Closer now. The air tasted metallic, like iron on his tongue. His heart jackhammered against his ribs. His breath coming in sharp, frantic gasps. He'd seen what happened when phantoms got close. He wasn't going out like that. Not like Daniels, not like Cortez. Captain, I'm out of position, he said, rising to a crouch. I'll draw it out. Get a clear shot. Negative, Voss. Stand down. You hear me? Stand down. He ignored her. He had to. One clean shot at the officer could turn this whole fight around. Maybe not the war, but this fight. And right now, that was enough. He rolled out from cover, rifle raised, vision blurring from the heat shimmer. There it was. The officer. It stood 8 feet tall. Its carapace a shifting mosaic of gray and black. Its 4 eyes glowing amber. Strange glyphs pulsed in sickly green light across the pack on its back, as though the machine were whispering to it. 2 long arms held something like a staff, tipped with a rotating sphere that pulsed with inner fire. It tilted its head at him, a movement too slow, too thoughtful. It knows, he thought. It knows I'm a threat. Come on, he breathed, sighting down the scope. Come on, you ugly bastard. The officer raised its staff. The air bent around it like gravity itself was warping. Voss's teeth chattered. He could hear something. Not sound, but a vibration in his bones. A low, predatory hum that made his eyes water. His finger squeezed the trigger. Crack. The rifle kicked, the plasma bolt streaking straight toward the officer's chest. Time slowed. Voss felt it before he saw it. The officer moved, not fast but precise, rotating its body with a fluid grace, letting the shot pass harmlessly over its shoulder. No. The officer aimed its staff at him. Light gathered at the sphere's core, growing brighter than a sunflower. Then the world exploded. He woke to the taste of blood and the distant sound of battle. His vision swam. His armor was cracked, the HUD flickering on and off. His ears rang so loudly he couldn't hear himself breathe. Smoke and ash swirled in the air. He rolled over, coughing, and his hand pressed against something wet and soft. Cortez's face stared back at him, or what was left of it. Voss gagged, crawling away. His body burned, his nerves on fire. His left arm wouldn't move. Dislocated. Maybe broken. Voss? You copy? Holloway. Her voice was faint, distorted. He tapped his helmet, feeling a surge of relief as the static cleared. Alive, he coughed. Barely. Sit tight, she said. We're en route. Don't, he croaked. Officers still here. I missed. There was a pause. Then her voice came softer, quieter. You didn't miss, Voss. He blinked, disoriented. What? Look behind you. He turned, vision swimming with spots of black and gray. But there it was, the officer's body, still and broken. Its torso split open by a charred, smoking wound. The pack on its back lay in pieces, sparks spilling out like fireflies. I didn't miss, he realized. He let his head fall back against the dirt, laughter bubbling out of him, raw and pained. It hurt to laugh, but he did it anyway. Captain, he wheezed, grinning at the burning sky. I think we just found out what it takes to kill a god. Holloway's reply came through with a smile in her voice. Damn right we did. They would win this battle. Not the war, not yet. But for the first time in weeks, humanity had done more than survive. They had struck back. And if they could kill one god, they could kill more. The phantoms had patience. But so did humanity. The evac point was 5 clicks west. Sergeant Elias Voss staggered forward, dragging his bad arm behind him like dead weight. His boots crunched through ash and rubble. Every breath was a sharp knife in his chest, and every step sent pain radiating up his spine. His visor was long gone, smashed to pieces when the officer's blast had thrown him like a rag doll. The HUD flickered occasionally from his chest display, but it was cracked too, and he doubted it had more than a few minutes of battery left. Around him, the world bled fire. Pillars of smoke rose like the fingers of dead giants, curling into the sky and blocking out the sun. The only light came from the fires, great, sprawling infernos that consumed skyscrapers, apartment blocks, and forests alike. The air shimmered with rising heat, and the distant echoes of battle played like an endless drumbeat in the background. He reached a ridge of crumbling concrete and knelt, cradling his side. Blood pooled under his chest plate, trickling out with every breath. His armor's internal systems had tried to seal it, but the patch was weak. He had maybe an hour before blood loss claimed him. "Captain," he grunted, tapping the side of his helmet. "I'm moving west, for clicks to evac. Officers down. Confirmed kill. Repeat, confirmed kill on Phantom Officer." The line hissed with static, then Holloway's voice cut through. "Copy that, Voss. Reinforcements are inbound to your position. Just hold it together, soldier." "Captain," he groaned, spitting blood. "I'm not making it back clean. Just saying it now." Her voice was firm. "Don't give me that. You put down a god, Voss. You're walking out of here if I have to carry you myself." He cracked a dry smile. "Wouldn't be the first time." Holloway chuckled softly. "Damn right it wouldn't." He cut the line, saving what little battery power remained. The evac point wasn't far. Just a few more clicks. He could make it. He had to. He staggered down the ridge, half hopping, half falling. His breath came in ragged gasps. His body was a mess of bruises, burns, and fractures, but he'd seen soldiers survive worse. Daniels had walked a full kilometer after losing both legs. Cortez fought with his face half gone. "I can make it," Voss thought, gritting his teeth. "I'm not dying here." He descended into a hollow valley, where the terrain shifted to jagged black rock and dust-choked air. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. It felt like walking through the heart of a furnace. Shadows danced on the edges of his vision. For a moment, he thought he was hallucinating, until he heard the distant clack-clack of something sharp tapping against stone. He stopped. His heart froze. He knew that sound. Phantom scouts. He crouched behind a chunk of broken concrete, shoulders heaving with each breath. He pulled his sidearm from his hip, a battered M94 mag pistol with a flickering ammo counter. 6 shots. He checked the chamber. 5 live rounds, 1 dud he'd been meaning to replace. No grenades, no backup. "Great," he muttered. "All I gotta do is kill something faster, stronger, and smarter than me. No big deal." The clacking grew louder. They were close. Phantoms didn't talk. They didn't signal each other. They didn't need to. The theory was that they had some form of hive mind, instant awareness shared between units. Soldiers called it the whisper. Every time a phantom saw you, they all saw you. He pressed his back to the concrete, heart hammering. "Don't look at them. Don't look at them," he told himself, breathing through his nose. He didn't know if that trick actually worked, but it was better than doing nothing. The clacking stopped. Silence. "No, no, 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 don't do that. Don't stop." Silence was worse than noise. Noise you could predict. Noise you could track. Silence? Silence meant you were already dead. Voss slowly tilted his head up, peeking just high enough to see over the concrete slab. The phantom was standing 10 meters away. It didn't move. It didn't shift. It simply existed, its long, spindly frame like a living shadow. Its skin shimmered, refracting the orange glow of distant fires. Two elongated arms hung at its sides, each ending in a set of barbed claws. Its head was a smooth dome with no face, just four softly glowing amber lights where eyes might have been. "Don't move. Don't move. Don't breathe." The phantom tilted its head slightly, as if it heard him. Voss felt something cold and primal stir in the base of his brain. It knows. It always knows. He clenched his sidearm, forcing himself to stay still. His eyes darted to the right. Distraction. I need a distraction. The cracked remains of a broken drone lay 10 feet from him. His fuel cell was still intact. If he could reach it, he might be able to ignite it. But moving meant death. No choice. He inhaled, held his breath, and moved. It wasn't a sprint. It wasn't even a dash. It was a single, quick roll to the right, his body lurching with the sudden motion. Pain stabbed his ribs like hot needles, but he didn't stop. He reached the drone, gripping the fuel cell's metal casing. He yanked, feeling resistance, then pop, it came free. The phantom turned. Now, Voss hurled the fuel cell like a grenade, straight toward the phantom's feet. For a fraction of a second, he thought he'd missed. Then it hit the ground, tumbled, and cracked. Boom! The fuel cell erupted in a flash of white-hot flame, shockwaves rippling through the valley. Voss threw himself to the ground, shielding his head. The heat hit him like a sledgehammer, but it wasn't enough to kill him. When he glanced up, his heart leapt in his chest. The phantom was on its knees, its carapace scorched and smoking. Staggered to 1 foot, its limbs twitching. Black ichor oozed from cracks in its torso. It hissed, a sharp, clicking sound like breaking glass. You can bleed, Voss thought. If it bleeds, it can die. He rose to his feet, unsteady but focused. His mag pistol was in his hand, already sighted. 6 shots. 5 live rounds. He pulled the trigger. Crack. The first shot caught the phantom in the chest. It stumbled. Crack. The second hit its neck. Black fluid sprayed the ground. Crack. The third shot missed, burying itself in the stone wall behind it. Damn it! The phantom surged forward, faster than anything that size had a right to move. It barreled straight at him, claws outstretched. Voss fired twice more, but only 1 hit, blowing out its right knee. It fell into a forward lurch, landing just 5 feet from him, clawed hands scraping at the ground to regain balance. 1 shot. 1 shot left. He leveled the pistol at its head. His hands shook. He could see its eyes now, those soft amber lights, dimming as if it knew. "No hive mind to save you now," Voss muttered. The phantom lunged. Voss fired. Crack. The bolt hit it dead center, splitting its head into 2 smoldering halves. The body jerked, limbs twitching wildly for a moment before it collapsed face down in the dirt, unmoving. Voss stared at it, chest heaving. He sank to his knees, all the adrenaline draining from him in an instant. His arm hung limp. His head felt heavy. 2 down, he thought, letting his eyes close. 2 gods dead. The comlink buzzed in his ear. "Voss." "Report," Captain Halloway said, her voice filled with static. "What's your status?" He exhaled slowly. His whole body felt like lead. But he smiled. "Alive," he rasped. "Out of ammo. Killed another one, though. Another officer." There was a long pause. When Halloway spoke again, her voice was quiet, filled with pride. "Hell of a day for miracles, Sergeant." "Yeah," Voss muttered, feeling his eyes close. "Don't let me miss it." His head tilted forward as unconsciousness finally claimed him. Somewhere in the distance, he thought he heard the low rumble of approaching gunships. He didn't know if it was real or just the sound of thunder. Either way, he finally let himself rest. Voss woke to darkness. Not the quiet darkness of sleep, but the suffocating, oppressive blackness of something deeper. It pressed against him, thick and unyielding, like being buried alive. For a moment he panicked. His heart jolted, and his lungs fought for air. Then his visor's emergency glow kicked in, casting a dim blue outline across his face. Slowly, his breathing steadied. He blinked away sweat that had pooled in his eyes and tried to orient himself. The soft hum of an engine echoed somewhere distant. Metal walls, cold steel beneath him. He wasn't outside anymore. Med Bay, he realized, blinking rapidly. I'm on a ship. His body felt like it had been dragged across broken glass. Bandages wrapped his torso, fresh stitches running down his left arm. His left leg was immobilized in a brace, and the bitter tang of antiseptics filled his nose. "Welcome back, soldier," came a familiar voice to his right. Voss tilted his head, gritting his teeth as a bolt of pain shot up his neck. Captain Marin Halloway sat on a fold-out bench, arms resting on her knees, her face worn but smiling. Her black combat armor bore fresh scrapes, her auburn hair matted with dust and sweat. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "How long was I out?" he croaked, his voice dry and cracked like sandpaper. 17 hours, she replied, leaning forward. "We thought we lost you for a bit, but you're tougher than you look." "Yeah, well, I've had practice," he muttered, shifting to sit up. Pain flared in his ribs, and he grunted, eyes squeezed shut. "Evac point." "Secured," Halloway said, reaching for a canteen and tossing it to him. He caught it with his good hand and unscrewed the cap. The water was lukewarm, metallic, but it tasted like heaven. Air support came in heavy. Phantoms pulled back, but not before they left a few surprises for us. Mines, spike drones, the usual. He wiped his mouth and glanced around. "Where are we now?" Halloway leaned back, her gaze distant. "On board the CNS Ironfall. Low orbit. It's one of the last big ships still running ops on Earth. Most of the fleets moved to Luna Command." "Why?" Voss frowned, pushing the canteen aside. "They're not abandoning Earth, are they?" Her eyes flicked to him, hard and sharp like broken glass. "No. But if we lose ground on Luna, there won't be an Earth left to save." He didn't argue. She was right. Everyone knew it. The war had moved beyond just saving cities and strongholds. It had become a numbers game, a war of attrition. The longer they could hold Luna, the longer humanity stayed in the fight. If Luna fell, Earth was next. There was no third option. "How bad is it down there?" he asked quietly. Halloway didn't answer right away. She ran a hand through her hair, her gaze distant. "Bad," she admitted. "London's gone. Shanghai too. Sydney's still holding, but barely. They've shifted to guerrilla tactics, small cells, hit-and-run ops. Civilians are being pulled to underground bunkers, but you know how long those last." "Not long," Voss muttered. Bunkers were just coffins with waiting periods. Halloway leaned forward, her eyes sharp and focused now. "But there's something else. Something bigger. That officer you killed? Command's been watching the Phantom Network since you took it down." His brow furrowed, and her lips pressed into a thin line. She glanced to the side, as if checking for eavesdroppers, then lowered her voice. "We think you broke something." Voss blinked. "Broke what?" "Command's calling it a cascade collapse." She pulled a small data chip from her utility belt and slid it into a terminal on the wall. A holographic display lit up, flickering with wireframe images. "After you killed that officer, Phantom coordination dropped by 22% worldwide. Like a switch got flipped." He stared at the display. It showed heat maps of Phantom activity across major regions. red for heavy enemy movement, yellow for medium, green for light. The red zones in the Americas, Europe, and Asia were still bad, but there were clear drops in intensity. Wait, he said, his mind catching up. You're saying killing that officer disrupted all of them? Not all, she corrected, tapping the screen. But enough to notice. Command's theory is that the officers aren't just leaders. They're network nodes. Kill one, and it disrupts every phantom tied to it. His jaw tightened as realization set in. Like cutting a wire out of a web. Exactly. She pointed to the map, zooming in on South America. We tested it. Special forces hit 2 more officers in Sao Paulo and Bogota. Same effect. Enemy units nearby went sluggish, less organized. We think if we take out enough of them, we can force a total breakdown. Voss leaned back, head against the cold wall. It all made sense now. The patience, the precision, the fact that the phantoms always seemed to know where to be, when to strike. They weren't just fast, they were coordinated. They shared information through those officers. Why didn't we figure this out sooner? He asked. We didn't know they could die, she replied. Every time we fought one, it either escaped or killed half our squad before retreating. But you killed 2. No one's done that before, Voss. He rubbed his eyes. So what's the plan, Captain? Her face grew grim. Phase 2. We hit them back. 2 days later, the drop pod rattled as it tore through the atmosphere, flames licking at the hull like hungry serpents. Red warning lights pulsed inside the cramped pod, casting everything in sharp, hellish contrast. Voss sat across from Captain Holloway, his armor repaired, his side bandaged. His rifle was maglocked to his chest, fresh clips of plasma rounds strapped to his thighs. His breathing was calm. It always was before a drop. Check comms, Holloway ordered, her voice tight. Status report. Comms green, Voss said, tapping his helmet. HUD synced. Biometrics stable. Good, she said, pulling her combat knife from its sheath and giving it a quick inspection. Don't lose focus, Voss. We're not hunting grunts this time. I know, he replied, glancing at her. We're hunting gods. The pod shook violently, and the G-force hit him like a brick wall. His head jerked back against the headrest, and he clenched his teeth to keep from biting his tongue. Through the reinforced window, he saw flashes of red-orange fire as other drop pods followed theirs down to the burning world below. The comms buzzed with chatter. Alpha 3 in position. 5 clicks east of LZ. Bravo 2. Heavy resistance near the plaza. Need fire support ASAP. Hold tight. Bravo 2. Holloway replied into her mic. Heavy units are inbound. Stick to your objectives. The comms went quiet. Then, for just a moment, Voss heard the faintest hum of static. A whisper just barely audible. His skin went cold. Captain, he said, glancing toward her. You hear that? She glanced up. Hear what? The whisper, he muttered, his eyes narrowing. They know we're coming. Her face went still. Slowly, she leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. Doesn't matter. Let them know. The impact hit like a freight train. The drop pod slammed into the earth with a deafening crash, dirt and stone exploding in every direction. Voss's harness disengaged, and he was on his feet in seconds, rifle in hand. Holloway moved just as fast, already scanning the horizon. They were in a crater. Fires raged in the distance. Phantom silhouettes moved along the ridgelines, amber eyes glowing in the dark. Phantoms inbound. Holloway barked. Move, move, move. Voss climbed out of the crater, rifle raised, eyes sharp. His gaze swept across the battlefield, watching the phantoms move with that same eerie precision. They shifted like a school of fish, reacting as one. But then he saw it, the largest one. Twice the size of a normal phantom. For glowing eyes. Glyphs pulsing across its back. The officer. Target spotted, Voss growled, leveling his sights. Captain, permission to engage? Granted, she said, her voice like steel. Take it down. Voss grinned, his finger on the trigger. One shot at a time. The world beyond the crater was chaos incarnate. Flames danced like wild animals across the ruined streets, casting long, flickering shadows against the remains of shattered skyscrapers. Dust and ash swirled through the air, lit by flashes of plasma fire. Every direction held noise. The crack of gunfire, the sharp whump of explosives, and the high-pitched metallic shriek of phantom combat drones. It was a symphony of war, loud, unrelenting, and unending. Sergeant Elias Voss crouched low behind a half-melted wreck of a civilian transport. His eyes locked on the officer standing at the far end of the street. It hadn't seen him yet, but that wouldn't last. It was scanning the battlefield, its four glowing amber eyes shifting in sharp, deliberate motions. It was huge, bigger than the last officer he'd killed. Its carapace was darker, almost black, and the glowing glyphs on its back pulsed like a heartbeat. He could hear them thumping in his skull, that subtle, subsonic throb that made his head ache if he focused on it too long. Holloway's voice crackled in his ear. Voss status? Eyes on the officer, he said, sliding his rifle into position. Big one. Bigger than the last two. Must be a higher rank. Can you take it? She asked. He swallowed, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his glove. If I can get a clear shot, yeah. Then do it, she replied firmly. You know the stakes. If it calls for reinforcements, we're done. No backup, no evac. You're the only thing standing between us and the end of this op. He nodded, knowing she couldn't see it. No pressure, he thought grimly. Voss steadied his breathing, focusing his sights on the officer. It moved with precision, scanning its surroundings with mechanical efficiency. Its arms were longer than its body, each ending in a set of hooked claws sharp enough to carve through titanium. He had seen what those claws could do. He'd seen soldiers carved into ribbons in the space of a heartbeat. No mistakes, no second chances. He centered his crosshairs on the glowing glyphs at the base of its spine. He had learned from the last officer that the node on its back wasn't just for show. It was a control system, a hub, maybe even a brain. Destroying it didn't just kill the officer. It sent ripples of confusion through every phantom connected to it. Breathe in. Breathe out. Squeeze. His finger tightened on the trigger. Crack. The plasma bolt tore through the air like a comet, glowing blue-white as it crossed the distance. Voss watched in perfect clarity as it hurtled toward the officer's back. But something was wrong. The officer's head snapped toward him too fast, too precise. Its amber eyes locked on him, and before the shot could connect, it twisted its body, the shot grazing its shoulder instead of the core. Damn it! Voss hissed, already on the move. He rolled behind another wrecked car just as the officer's counterattack came. The ground exploded where he'd been crouched, sending chunks of asphalt into the air. Molten stone rained down, singeing his armor. They're learning, he thought. They're learning how we fight. Shot missed, he barked into comms. Officers aware. Engaging. Stay alive, Voss, Holloway snapped. I'm bringing fire support. Better make it fast, he growled, sprinting down the war-torn street, weaving between wreckage as plasma fire chased him. The officer moved with terrifying grace, each step a calculated motion. Voss knew it wasn't random. It wasn't just trying to kill him. It was hurting him. He slid behind a burned-out cargo hauler, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He pressed his back to the metal and checked his rifle. 3 plasma cells left. He'd have to reload soon, but every second he took his eyes off the officer was a second too long. The whispering started again. He pressed his fingers to his temple, teeth gritted. The sound wasn't coming from his comms. It was inside his head. Soft, like distant voices echoing from a canyon. No words, just pressure. It wasn't like anything human, but it was trying to be. Like a machine learning to speak, mimicking sounds it didn't understand. "Get out of my head," he hissed, shaking it off. The officer appeared on the far side of the hauler, its claws digging into the side of the vehicle. Sparks flew as it carved deep gouges into the metal. It tilted its head, watching him with those 4 amber eyes, like a cat watching a mouse trapped in a cage. "Voss," Holloway's voice cut in. "They've flagged your location. Reinforcements inbound. ETA 3 minutes. You have to move." "Not much room to move, Captain," he said, bracing his back against the hauler. "This one's smarter. Smarter than the others." She didn't answer, and that silence said everything. There was no advice for this. No tactical guide on how to kill something that had evolved to kill you. He glanced down at his rifle, his hands steady. No time for doubt. "All right, big guy. Let's see how smart you really are." He grabbed a fragment of twisted rebar at his feet, held it in his left hand, and leaned out just far enough for the officer to see him. The second its eyes shifted toward him, he hurled the rebar at its head. The alien didn't flinch. It swatted the rebar aside like it was nothing. But Voss had already moved. He was sprinting now, pushing his battered legs as hard as they'd go, ignoring the burning pain in his ribs. His footfalls crunched against broken glass and rubble as he vaulted over a crumbling barricade, throwing himself into an alleyway between 2 ruined buildings. Plasma fire followed him, blasting chunks from the walls, turning brick to ash. A piece of shrapnel clipped his shoulder, but he didn't stop. He ran until his lungs felt like they'd burst. The moment he was clear, he spun, dropped to one knee, and raised his rifle. The officer rounded the corner, too fast, too confident. "Got you." He fired. The bolt hit the officer in the center of its face. The impact wasn't enough to kill it, but it staggered, amber eyes flickering. It hissed, claws raking the air as it stumbled. "Not so fast now, huh?" Voss growled, already sighting for the second shot. Crack. The second bolt punched into its leg, forcing it to its knees. The glyphs on its back flickered violently, flashes of green and white dancing across its surface. "Get down!" Holloway's voice barked. Voss hit the ground just as a humph of compressed air filled the alley. The roar of incoming fire drowned out everything else. 3 heavy kinetic rounds slammed into the officer, each one striking with the force of a freight train. The officer jerked with each hit, limbs flailing as black ichor sprayed in wide arcs. His glyphs pulsed faster, erratically. "Not this time," Voss muttered, lining up his shot one more time. He aimed for the heart of the node. Center mass. No mistakes. Crack. The bolt hit true. The glyphs went dark. The officer spasmed, its limbs twitching violently before it collapsed in a heap of broken carapace and black blood. For a moment, everything went still. Then the whisper stopped. No more voices. No more echoes in his skull. Silence. "Voss, do you read?" Holloway's voice came in clear, sharp, like a bell after a storm. "Officer down," he said, chest heaving. "Node's dead. I'm still breathing." "Copy that, Sergeant," she said, her voice lighter now. "You did it. Fire team's on the way. Hold position." Voss leaned against the wall, head tilted back. He stared up at the broken sky, the smoke and fire still swirling like a storm. His eyes were heavy, but he didn't close them this time, because something was different. He could feel it. They had killed 3 officers in 1 week. 3 network nodes down. Command would know. The Phantoms would know too. And next time they'd send something worse. "Captain," he said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. "They're not gonna stop, are they?" There was a long pause before she replied. "No," she admitted. "But neither are we." He smiled at that, leaning his head back, eyes still watching the sky. "Yeah," he muttered, his voice tired but steady. "Neither are we." They came in the dead of night. Not that night meant much anymore. The sky had been choked with ash and smoke for weeks. The sun was a dim, sullen glow behind an endless veil of gray. But as the minutes crept past midnight, the world grew unnervingly quiet. The constant crack of gunfire, the distant thump of artillery, even the low rumble of distant orbital strikes, all of it ceased. That was the first warning. Sergeant Elias Voss knew better than to think it was luck. The Phantoms didn't leave. They repositioned. They waited. And when they struck, they did it with all the precision of a surgeon cutting out a tumor. His fingers hovered over the trigger of his rifle as he peered through the scope. The thermal imaging was useless now. The Phantoms had adapted. They ran too cold for sensors to catch them. He'd have better luck spotting their shadows than relying on tech. "Report," Captain Holloway's voice crackled through the comms. "Nothing," Voss replied, eyes scanning the ruined street below. "Too quiet. I don't like it." "Nobody likes it, Sergeant," she said grimly. "Bravo team just went dark 2 clicks east of your position. No distress call, no chatter, just gone." "Same thing that hit Delta last week?" Voss asked, though he already knew the answer. "Yeah," she confirmed. "Something's hunting squads. No survivors." His jaw tightened. Delta had been a full 10-man squad with drone support and an armored walker. They'd been wiped out in 47 seconds. Command had only caught the tail end of it on satellite feed. Just flashes of motion, blurred shapes, and static. "Orders?" he asked. "Stay put," she said. "Your bait." "Great," he muttered, checking his ammo count. Always wanted to be a chew toy. 3:42 a.m. The first sign was the sound. Not a screech. Not the sharp clicks of a Phantom scout. This was different. A soft, steady hum. No, not a hum. A vibration. Voss felt it in his teeth. A low, resonant thrum, like being too close to a power generator. It made his head ache, his bones buzz. He pressed his gloved hand against the steel wall of the ruined building he was sheltering in, feeling it pulse beneath his palm. "Captain," he hissed, eyes scanning the darkness. "I've got something new." "Define new, Sergeant." "Feel it more than hear it," he replied, his voice low, breath shallow. "Vibrations, like an engine or—" The wall exploded. A flash of light, deafening thunder. Shrapnel tore through the room like knives, embedding in walls, floors, and his leg. Voss hit the ground hard, rolling to his back, gasping through the sudden rush of pain. Blood soaked his thigh armor, his pulse thudding against the wound. His ears rang with a high-pitched whine. "Voss! Report! Report!" Holloway's voice cut through the static. "Hit!" he grunted, dragging himself behind a chunk of concrete. His heart pounded like a war drum. "They blew the wall. I've got eyes on—" He froze mid-sentence. It wasn't a Phantom. It was something worse. The thing that stepped through the smoking hole wasn't shaped like any of the officers or scouts he'd faced before. It was broader, bulkier. Its arms were as thick as tree trunks, ending in multi-bladed claws that clicked against each other with mechanical precision. Its legs were reverse-jointed, giving it a predatory stance, and its carapace shimmered with shifting textures, its surface constantly adjusting like a living chameleon. But its face was the worst part. It had a face now. Not the blank dome of the phantoms. No, this was a crude imitation of a human face. Parody. Hollow eyes. A slit where a mouth should be. It twitched and glitched as if it hadn't fully learned how to shape it yet. Like it was still practicing. It saw him. Its hollow eyes locked on him. A low, guttural click 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 escaped its throat. "Captain," he breathed, his voice shaking. "It's not a phantom. It's something bigger. It's looking right at me." "Voss, run!" Holloway's voice barked. "Fall back now." It moved. Fast. Voss threw himself sideways as the creature lunged. Its clawed hand slamming into the concrete where he'd been a second earlier. The impact sent cracks spiderwebbing through the wall. Bits of stone rained down, bouncing off his helmet as he scrambled to his feet. He raised his rifle and fired 3 quick bursts. The shots struck center mass, but the thing didn't flinch. The impact sparked against its chest, barely leaving scorch marks. "Armor's too thick," Voss gasped, running for the doorway. The creature growled, a horrible wet, rattling sound like a broken engine trying to turn over. Voss vaulted over a shattered desk and ducked behind a steel pillar. He could hear it moving behind him, each step a heavy thud that shook the ground. Think, 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 think. He tapped into his HUD, his eyes flicking through the tactical display. No support, no drones, no heavy firepower. His eyes landed on his grenade pouch, 3 left. Not enough to kill it, but maybe enough to slow it down. No choice. He yanked a grenade, primed it, and tossed it high in an arc toward the ceiling. It clattered once, twice, and landed near the creature's feet. Boom! The explosion was sharp and bright, throwing sparks, flame, and shards of debris in every direction. Dust filled the room, obscuring his vision, but he heard the creature roar. A deep, vibrating howl that rattled his teeth. The sound wasn't pain. It was anger. "Oh, come on," Voss hissed, forcing himself to his feet. His leg throbbed with each step, blood pooling in his boot. He bolted for the stairwell at the back of the room, glancing back just in time to see the creature push itself up from the rubble. Its glowing amber eyes pierced the smoke, watching him leave. But it didn't follow. It didn't need to. The moment Voss reached the stairs, the vibration hit him harder than before. It wasn't in his head this time. It was everywhere. The walls, the ground, his bones, the whisper. Except this wasn't the distant hum he'd known before. This was a roar of information being broadcast in every direction. He clutched his head, teeth clenched in pain. "They're calling reinforcements," he shouted into comms. "Voss, what the hell is going on?" Holloway's voice was sharp. "You're breaking up. They're calling for backup." He growled through clenched teeth, staggering up the stairs. His vision blurred, his head swimming. "Captain, it's not just one officer. It's a control node. It's sending orders to all of them." Silence. Then Holloway's voice came back, deadly calm. "Voss, listen to me. If it's a control node, you know what you have to do." He did. He didn't want to admit it, but he knew. "You want me to fight that thing?" He hissed. "I've got 1 mag and 3 grenades, Captain. I don't have enough firepower to—" "Then you don't fight it," she said, her voice colder than he'd ever heard it. "You end it. Find its node. Blow it up. If you die doing it, at least you die knowing you saved the rest of us." He felt a chill crawl up his spine. His eyes flicked to the wall ahead of him, eyes narrowed in thought. The node was always on the back. Always. He exhaled slowly, flexing his fingers. Blood dripped from his armor. His hands were slick, dirty, shaking. "All right," he muttered, his voice cold and steady. "One more god to kill." He turned around and headed back down the stairs, his eyes locked on the glowing amber lights in the distance. The creature was waiting for him, claws raised, amber eyes shining like twin lanterns in the dark. It saw him coming. It knew. Voss dropped his rifle, pulled the 2 remaining grenades, and held them tight in each hand. The creature tilted its head, curious. Yeah, Voss said, his grin sharp as a blade. You figured it out, didn't you? He sprinted straight at it. The whisper grew louder, a deafening, incomprehensible scream. Voss grinned wider. Shut up. He dove under its swing, hooked his arm around its neck, pulled the grenade's pins, and drove them both into the glowing node on its back. The last thing he saw was the light, and then silence. There was nothing. No light, no sound, no pain, no sensation at all. Voss floated in that emptiness for what felt like 1,000 years. Maybe more. Is this what it feels like to be dead? He wondered, though even his own thoughts felt distant, as if muffled by thick, heavy fog. Then, slowly, the world began to return. First, it was sound. Not words, not even noise, but vibrations. Low, rhythmic pulses, like the distant thump of war drums. Each beat sent a ripple through the void, tugging him back toward something solid. The sound grew louder, and with it came a faint, static-filled buzz in his ear. The buzz sharpened into a voice. Voss, do you hear me? Repeat. Sergeant Elias Voss. Do you copy? Holloway. Her voice hit him like a jolt of electricity. His eyes shot open, and for a brief, horrible moment, he saw nothing but searing white. Flashbang, his brain screamed. I've been flashbanged. But it wasn't a flashbang. His vision slowly adjusted, and blurry shapes took form. Chunks of concrete, a twisted metal beam, a splatter of thick black ichor against the wall. Smoke swirled in thick, lazy clouds overhead, turning the air into a suffocating haze. Voss! Come in, damn it! Holloway's voice grew sharper. Say something, soldier! He coughed. It hurt like hell. His ribs felt like someone had driven spikes into his chest. His throat was dry, his tongue thick like cotton. But he was alive. Yeah, he croaked, his voice like gravel on concrete. I'm here, Captain. There was a long pause on the other end. For a second, he thought maybe he'd lost her. Then he heard a shaky exhale. Damn it, Sergeant, Holloway muttered, her voice soft with relief. I thought you were gone. Not yet, he muttered, turning his head slowly to look around. But I'm not exactly in great shape. The wreckage of the battle surrounded him. What had once been a 2-story structure was now a jagged ruin of broken stone and twisted rebar. Sparks shot from exposed electrical wiring. A pool of glowing green fluid oozed from what looked like a ruptured phantom core, sizzling and steaming as it hit the ground. The air reeked of burnt flesh and molten metal. And then he saw it, the control node, or rather what was left of it. The creature lay face down in the rubble, its limbs bent at impossible angles, its torso cracked wide open like a broken shell. Black ichor pooled around it in steaming puddles. The glyphs that had glowed so brightly on its back were now dark, their eerie light extinguished for good. A crater-like scorch mark marred the center of its back, the telltale result of 2 live grenades detonating at point-blank range. He'd done it. It was dead. Killed it, Voss thought. I killed a control node. Captain, he breathed, every word an effort. Nodes down. Confirm kill. Static buzzed in his ear for a second before Holloway replied, her tone sharp with excitement. We see it, Sergeant. We see it. Phantom signals across the whole sector just dropped by 40%. They're scrambling. He blinked in surprise, staring at the lifeless form of the node. 40%? 1 kill had caused that much disruption? Captain, he muttered, using the wall to slowly drag himself to a sitting position. His head swam with dizziness, and his leg throbbed with every movement. If one node knocks out 40%. I know, Holloway replied, her tone serious now. Command is already moving. They want us to identify as many nodes as possible. If we can take down 5 or 6 more, we end the war. Voss finished for her, staring at the dead thing. We end all of it. Silence hung over the comms. He knew she was thinking the same thing he was. If it's that simple, why didn't they send us after the nodes from the start? But they both knew the answer. Nobody had survived long enough to figure it out. Until now. Evacs inbound, Holloway said at last. 7 minutes out. Sit tight, Sergeant. He didn't reply. He just watched the node's body, eyes locked on its motionless frame. 6:28 a.m. The evac never came. They were 2 minutes away when the first warning came through the comms. This is Raven 2, we're under fire. Repeat, taking heavy fire from static. Voss pressed his fingers to his helmet. Captain, what the hell was that? Raven 2's down, Holloway growled. Anti-air emplacement. New position. Unknown. Voss swore under his breath. The Phantoms didn't usually set up anti-air guns. Not unless. They're mad, Captain, he said, eyes scanning the horizon. They know what we're doing. They know we're taking their nodes. Copy that, she said, her tone all business now. Hold tight, Voss. Raven 3 is rerouting. 8 minutes. No more surprises this time. No more surprises. He almost laughed. The vibration returned. It was subtle at first, barely more than a hum in his bones. But it was rising, growing. He felt it in his chest, his heart beating faster. Not like before. This time it wasn't a whisper. It was a roar. Captain, he said, his voice slow, deliberate. Do you feel that? Negative, she replied. What are you feeling, Voss? He didn't answer right away. He rose slowly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The ash-choked sky swirled in thick clouds of gray and orange. Smoke pillars rose like twisted fingers clawing at the heavens. But something was coming. The air shifted. The shadows grew darker. They're coming, he muttered, breath fogging his visor. They're coming for me. Voss, stay calm, Holloway said, urgency rising in her voice. Reinforcements are 10 minutes out. Just hold your ground. He stared at the skyline, heart pounding in his chest. One by one, dim pinpricks of amber light flickered to life within the swirling fog. Dozens of them. No, hundreds. Amber eyes, moving toward him like a wave of glowing embers in a storm. Phantoms. Scouts. Soldiers. Officers. He saw them all, crawling over ruins, stalking through the haze. Their movement wasn't slow, it was deliberate, precise, coordinated. He knew why. He'd killed their node. They were coming to kill him in return. Captain, he said softly, there's too many. Her response was immediate. Don't say that, Voss. You've faced worse. You can hold. He chuckled, the sound raw and bitter. Not this time, Captain. Don't you dare. Her voice was fierce now. You hold that ground. You hear me? You hold it. He pulled his last magazine from his chest rig and slotted it into his rifle. He checked his sidearm. He checked his combat knife. He checked his grenades. One left. He felt his heartbeat slow. His breathing leveled out. His hands stopped shaking. He'd seen men like this before. Cortez. Daniels. Men who knew at the end that they weren't walking away. It wasn't fear. It wasn't panic. It was peace. Captain, he said, his voice calm. No one's coming in time. You shut your mouth, Voss. She barked, fury breaking through the static. You killed 2 officers. You took down a node. You don't get to quit now. You fight. You fight. He nodded, wiping the blood from his eyes. "I know," he said softly, watching the amber eyes close in. "I'll make em pay for it." He raised his rifle, sighted in on the first phantom, and pulled the trigger. Crack. It dropped. Another took its place. Crack. Another down. More poured in from the fog, crawling like insects. He fired. Reloaded. Fired again. "Come on," he growled through gritted teeth. "You want me? Come and get me." And they did. But he didn't stop shooting. He was the last man standing. And he knew in that moment he was going to make it count. The moment the fog broke, it was like a dam had burst. The phantoms charged. Not the slow, deliberate stalk they were known for. No, this was different. They rushed. Dozens at first, then hundreds. Their glowing amber eyes darted like fireflies in the swirling haze, their chittering calls mixing with the thrum of their claws on stone. The sound of it all was deafening. Like a swarm of locusts, but heavier, more violent. Voss stood his ground. His rifle was steady in his hands, his breath slow and controlled. His visor lit up with targeting markers, flickering red shapes identifying the nearest threats. His body felt like it was running on fumes, every muscle screaming for rest. But his mind was still sharp, clear, cold. One shot, one kill. He squeezed the trigger. Crack. The bolt of plasma struck the closest phantom dead center in its chest. It stumbled, its carapace smoking, limbs twitching as it collapsed. Voss shifted his aim without thinking. Crack, crack, crack. 3 more shots. 3 more kills. They moved faster now. No longer cautious. No longer calculating. Their hive mind was angry. No, not just angry, desperate. They knew what Voss was. They knew what he'd done. He wasn't just prey. He was a threat. And threats had to be eliminated. "Captain," he said, tapping his comm as he ducked behind a chunk of concrete. His back pressed flat against the cold stone. Plasma bolts zipped past him, melting holes in the wall with every impact. "This is Voss. Position's hot. Repeat, position is hot. I've got a whole damn hive coming for me." "Copy that, Sergeant," Captain Holloway replied, her voice clipped and urgent. "Reinforcements are 6 minutes out. Just hold tight." "6 minutes?" he barked, peeking over his cover to line up another shot. 2 phantoms darted toward him, one from the left, one from the right. He dropped the first with a shot to the throat, but the second leapt, its claws slashing the air toward him. Too fast. He ducked, rolled to the side, and drove his combat knife upward with all the strength he had left. The blade jammed into the phantom's abdomen, its black ichor splattering across his faceplate. It made a chittering scream, twitching wildly, but he twisted the knife hard, forcing it deeper. The phantom went limp. He shoved it off of him, his chest heaving as he yanked his knife free. His heart felt like it was going to burst. 6 minutes, Holloway repeated. "You can do this." He wiped the black ichor from his visor, glaring into the fog. More eyes, more claws. He could hear them clicking on the stone. "Yeah," he muttered, pulling his last grenade from his belt. "I can do 6. 3:48 a.m. It wasn't 6 minutes. It was 6 lifetimes. Voss fell into the rhythm of the fight, his mind running on pure instinct. Fire. Move. Reload. Fire again. His arms moved on autopilot. His eyes scanned for movement, calculated threat levels, and prioritized targets. The pain in his leg was distant now, barely more than a dull ache. Adrenaline did that. It dulled the pain but sharpened everything else. His rifle clicked dry. Reloading, he hissed to himself, slamming a fresh plasma cell into the chamber. The weapon hummed with fresh energy, and he was already back to firing. He could see the bodies piling up now. phantoms lay in heaps, their limbs tangled together, their ichor pooling like oil slicks. Their amber eyes were dark, lifeless. But they didn't stop coming. A phantom scout vaulted over the bodies, faster than the others. Voss spun, pulling his sidearm and firing twice. Both shots hit its head. It crumpled mid-leap, its body flipping end over end before landing in a heap. He didn't even have time to feel satisfied. Two more sprinted through the fog. No time. He grabbed the last grenade from his belt and pulled the pin. "Come on, you ugly freaks," he growled, his eyes locked on them. "Come get me." He tossed the grenade at their feet. Boom! The shock wave threw him backward, landing hard against the wall. His ears rang with the deafening crack of the blast. Shrapnel pinged off his armor. He blinked rapidly, his vision swimming with static and afterimages. His head throbbed, his hands numb. But when he opened his eyes, he saw it. The fog was gone. The blast had cleared the haze, revealing the ruined city around him. Fires burned in the distance, pillars of smoke twisting like serpents in the air. But it wasn't the city that caught his attention. It was them. Oh no, they were everywhere. Hundreds of them, crawling over rooftops, perched on ledges, climbing the sides of ruined skyscrapers like spiders. Amber eyes, one after another, flickering to life like distant stars. He could see them all now, and they were all looking at him. "Captain," he said, his voice barely a whisper. They're everywhere. Hold fast, Sergeant," Holloway snapped, her voice firm but tense. "Raven 3 is 2 minutes out. You hear me, Voss? 2 minutes. One more god to kill." The phantoms closed in. "Come on," he whispered, holding his ground. "Come on." He charged. He didn't wait for them. He didn't let them have the satisfaction. He threw himself at the nearest one, his knife flashing. Black ichor sprayed his face as he drove it into the creature's neck. He pulled it free, twisting, spinning, slicing. They swarmed him. Claws slashed his arms. Teeth tore at his leg. His vision went dark. But he didn't stop fighting. The static on the comms crackled. "Raven 3 on site. Deploying fire support. Sergeant Voss, do you copy?" Holloway's voice was sharp with panic. "Do you copy?" Nothing but static. "Voss? Voss!" Her breath caught in her throat. Her voice was soft now. "Don't do this, Sergeant. Don't you dare." Then a new sound came through the comms. It wasn't static. It wasn't a scream. It was his voice. Soft. Faint. "Not yet, Captain," he whispered, his voice like gravel. "Not yet." Silence. Then, over the comm, she heard something she hadn't expected. Laughter. Raw. Bloody. But it was laughter. "Sergeant," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "You stubborn son of a..." The comms cut, but the laughter kept echoing.